Okay, let's get back to protists. This will be talking about algal protists. In other words, autotrophic protists, which means, of course, that they make their own food by photosynthesis. Ecologically, that's going to be important for all these groups, is that they're primary producers. So that means in the ecosystem, the primary producer can take solar energy and convert it to chemical energy and food. So these guys make their own food that everybody else eats, or eats somebody that ate the primary producer. Now these guys are not going to be on land. Those are mostly land plants. These are the primary producers in the ocean or any body of water. So we have dinoflagellates is our first group. We're looking at basically the same things we did for the heterotrophic protists. So the dinoflagellates, that's a broad name. So dinoflagellates are in chromalveolata, specifically alveolates, which means that they'd have little air pockets, little bubbles underneath their plasma membrane. You can't see them, but that's what the alveolates have. We talked ecologically, they're primary producers. They also, ecological and economic, they can produce red tide. So these are algae. So when it's warm and there's lots of nutrients, the algae will bloom, which means they reproduce a lot, and there's tons and tons of them, very dense in the water. And that's why the water turns different colors, because these guys have pigments. Of course, they're algae, so they have to capture sunlight. And so sometimes certain genuses and species of dinoflagellates cause what we call red tide, which would be a toxic. So they release toxins when they bloom, which kills fish, which also can get inside the mollusks. And then if humans eat the mollusks, they can get very sick and die as well. We also sometimes have dermal kind of irritations for humans. Pfiesteria is one that they're pretty sure causes red tide. There was some controversy for a while over the toxin because they couldn't find it. But Pfiesteria would be appropriate to put down for a red tide causing dinoflagellate. Karenia brevis definitely causes red tide, and we know the toxin in that one called brevetoxin goes with its species, brevis, brevetoxin. I can remember this one because my sister's name's Karen, Karenia. Not that that helps you very much, but hey, maybe you'll remember Professor Scher's sister's Karen, so this is Karenia brevis. Here's some interesting information about the research if you're interested in that. And then, as the name suggests, flagellate means this guy has a flagellum. This is not really the flagellum, but there is a flagellum. So that's how it moves. Also, dinoflagellates in your packet from way back, it's a little chart, the reef building, so they're going to live with the coral animals. Corals are animals, and they are photosynthesizers. And so basically they provide the coral animals with food to eat so the coral can build their reefs, which are extremely important habitats. And they also do this cool bioluminescence. I know it happens in Puerto Rico. It also happens in other places, maybe in even California, where there's lots of dinoflagellates. And what would happen, is they fluoresce. So they swim around. Now they're very small, but this is beautiful. It's also a major tourist attraction. So economically, this is something significant. And a lot of times, too, it's like you're in the water and you move your hand around, and they bioluminesce when you move them, which is pretty neat. So that would be an economic application of these guys, tourist attraction, due to their bioluminescence. So if you go to Puerto Rico, you should definitely check that out. My sister said it was awesome. Okay, so that's dinoflagellates. This is now getting into our bigger algae. The biggest algae we have is called, the group is brown algae. It's also a chrome alveolate, and it's in the Straminopyle group. Mostly I care, brown algae. All the brown algae is going to have this fucoxanthin pigment, which looks sort of olive-ish, brownish olive. That's why they have their color. You'll notice structurally there are these little bulbous parts. So this is specifically on Sargassum, but other brown algae have these as well. So Sargassum is the genus of this brown algae. It's found in the Sargasso Sea. And these floats are filled with gas, air, or sometimes nitrogen, but you can say gas-filled floats. And the reason they have those would be to keep the algae floating near the surface so it can do photosynthesis. Remember, just because it looks like a plant, it's not. We don't call these leaves and a stem and roots. We call them holdfasts. Those would be the root-ish parts, the holdfasts. We call the leaf-looking parts blades. And we call that middle part a stipe. Ecologically, they are important primary producers. These are all the seaweed you'd see at Galveston. Like on the beach, the seaweed looks pretty much like this, so it's mostly sargassum. Other economic uses of brown algae, lamnaria or kombu is eaten. It's a Japanese soups. And other types of algae, you can extract algin from them, which can be used to thicken food. And actually, if you look at a lot of the backs of your food packages, you'll see algin on there. So that's a food thickener, like maybe your pudding or your salad dressing, things like that. Another type of brown algae is kelp. And all the brown algae lives in the cooler water. So like the Pacific Ocean off the coast of California, pretty cold. Everyone wears wetsuits there. The kelp and all the brown algae like to grow there, the kelp particularly. And you can see there's mass, quote-unquote, forests of kelp. They're not plants, though. They're protists. They can be very, very tall. And they also have these air-filled pods, or what do you want to call them? Bulbs. So they're in the cool water, and kelp is not only an important food source, like a primary producer, it's also a very important habitat to organisms like the otters and lots of fish. So if I show you just the beginning of this is off the coast of California, and this is a dive, and you'll just see a bunch of the kelp and lots of animals that live there. So you can see it's quite tall. Lots of fish. We have sharks. There's the otters. We also have other fish. You can see the people scuba diving. And there would be your kelp. Then we go to red algae. So now this was in chrome alveolate, a straminopile. Red algae is in the Archaeplastidia, which you remember, Archaeplastidia is the one that the land plants are in as well. So red algae is the general group. Here's our two species, the Dacia. So if your whole mount species looks kind of spindly, you're looking at the Dacia. If it looks like small, more tuft-ish, chunks of algae, it's the Corallina. The color pigment here is phycoerythrin. So erythrin is like erythrocyte, which is your red blood cells. So erythrin is the red. So the phycoerythrin is the red pigment. Of course, there's chlorophyll as well. It's just not as much as the red one. They live in warm waters. So your brown algae lives in cool waters that are shallower. Red algae can live in very deep waters. Not always, but it can. And they tend to be tropical, warm. Primary producers. We also use them economically for food. So this is going to be your sushi algae, seaweed, called nori. Porphyria is the genus there, but nori is that's what they call the wrap that they make sushi with. Agar, like what we plated our bacteria on, is made from derivatives of red algae. And carrageenan as well, food stabilizer. That's another one that you'd see on the backs of the food packages. So the spindly one, Dacia, the clumpy one, Corallina, and I should say the kelp is going to be long blades, real long flat blades. The sargassum will be with the little pods that are filled with the gas, as well as more blades instead of long ones that are real flat. Then we come to our green algae. So that's our red, now green. Same category, same supergroup as red, Archaeplastidia. They are in the chlorophytes. So not the green algae that's most closely related to plants, land plants. Those are the charophytes. These are chlorophytes. Of course, their pigment is chlorophyll A. That's the predominant one, why they look green. And we had two species we looked at, or two specimens, the genus Ulva, which is our sea lettuce, and we have the genus Spirogyra, which I don't have a picture of, but we looked at it in the slide, but if you get a BIOS mount of it, it's going to be lots of stringy green. So stringy green is the Spirogyra. The bigger one here is the more flat is the Ulva. They are primary producers. Potentially, economically, we're looking at them to make biofuels. Other examples in the book that you might recall of green algae would be Volvox, Chlamydomonas, and Qualerpa. So if I asked you, hey, what's this green algae? And you told me, oh, it's Spirogyra, and I asked you, okay, what's another type? You could name Ulva or any of these. Okay. So those are our the ones that we went over of the algae.